Um, First of all, just a thanks to Harry and to all of the folks at the University of Tennessee for putting on such a splendid conference. Thank you so much. And also a thanks to my own co-panelists, to Arnold and to Bill. The catalyst initially for my interest in this paper was a conference that I was at in Belgium in October, which was on after postmodernism. And a number of issues came up at that conference and got me to thinking about some things that Arnold and I had talked about, and I had talked with people in the philosophy department at DePaul, and seemed to be a time to at least raise some of the questions that I will raise with you today. There are two thoughts beforehand. One is that these are both in the form of polls, if you will. The first poll is the poll between, in terms of a conference presentation, the poll between the sense of urgency that this is a time it's a key moment, it seems to me, in the political history of the West. A time when the great ideology, when the great and even the tiny, well, the great ideologies collapsed a while ago. Now even the tiny ideologies have collapsed, and that leads to the sense of what do we do now, and we should do it quickly. And on the other hand, a long-term sense. We've talked about some of these things that it's really a long-term framework that helps us through these quite severe bumps in the road. And this is going to be more of a long-term presentation, although I'm, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, why didn't I do something that addressed the urgency of it? But as I go to conferences in the last few months, I'm getting it wrong every time, so apparently there's no right way to do it. Or I think whichever way I do it, the other way might have been better. And secondly, the pull between, at this time, do we do something, do we think practically, even in a long-term sense, or do we think theoretically in a long-term, that's the second poll. And again, I am doing some work now connected with a progressive think tank working with the Obama administration. I don't know if this is the right thing to do, but I'm struggling with some issues there, and if people want to talk about it, anyone wants to talk about it, I'm delighted to. That's not what I'm talking about here. I picked the more theoretical of that quadrant. So I'm in the theoretical long-term quadrant, which is probably exactly the opposite from where I should be in the practical urgent quadrant. But there you have it. Next year I'll get it wrong, probably on the opposite way. Anyway, after postmodernism toward the recovery of theory. The fateful question for our time is what comes after postmodernism? What comes after the after? Building upon the insight of Thomas Mann and Dr. Faustus, the great fictional study of the postmodern composer Adrian Leverkusen, and insights of some of the postmodernists themselves. The lingering but ultimately expunged final dissonant chord, whose uncanny presence in absence turns cosmic emptiness into the cult of memory. Ritualized attentiveness to the faded chord which connects us back to a departed world of meaning by a gossamer thread. A vision of this ritual is acted out in the greatest of all works of deconstruction, in The Recovery of Lost Time, in which Marcel Proust guards this attenuating thread with his life, like the Wichita lineman. For that is his life. The traveler stranded at the beginning of the epic novel can no longer go forward. There is no more track to lay and no destination to lay it toward. Only the obscured recesses of a lost world when the future still existed, now as fugitive as the years. But what about those of us for whom the after is not enough? Those of us for whom postmodernism played a critical role in clearing away exploitative master narratives and crumbling theoretical universals, through its radical interrogation of philosophical cultural presumptions and political conceptual privileges, yet left us, in Derrida's term, late to the end of history. Those of us who demand a future, what can future mean after the after? It is clearly in some sense to begin anew, but this is insufficient. It is not just putting another quarter into the pinball machine for a new game, or drawing upon a blank slate, or with the industrial strength cleaning fluid of postmodernism spread upon everything. Now here I'm going to mix metaphors like crazy. It requires some greater solvent as we head out in the face of gale force winds. In fact, and perhaps unexpectedly, the uncomforting nostrums of dissolution achieve the capacity to quiet our savage beast, to console us for our failure to make history or even try. In its radical interrogation of all claims of possibility, ultimately dissolving things into unconnected monads without God, it sharpened the scalpels to use on all efforts at possibility and connectivity. Connectivity and possibility, we now all too easily believe, are radical illusion, bad faith, the effort to impose an ordered middle term or narrative on discrete, disparate, and ultimately inert phenomena, to forge a union or project out of an imperial urge to colonize. One way out, of course, is to turn in revulsion from the impossibility of living this radical faithlessness. In Dr. Faustus, the purity of Adrian's quest to see the world's meaninglessness, which has rendered even God's omniscient eye a place of wish fulfillment. After all, who would have more at stake in a project than its own creator? Is ultimately undone by infantile needs that turn him, in Germany, which he represents, into a monster of pseudo-innocent primal hunger for recognition and domination. For Proust, memory becomes an infinite loop of fraying cohesion and coherence, perpetually papered over by the romantic will to reinstate a mythic unity. Derrida's case is equally poignant. Asking late in life, I would like to learn to live, finally. Haunted by the ghosts of time past, produced by trauma and mourning, he inquires about seers and visionaries and their power of conjuration, of effecting a promised return of a presence to come, or what he will call elsewhere simply candidly at nightfall, the desire of resurrection. In my understanding, proposing the naked and impossible need for a Savior as the answer to how to live finally betrays the final, desperate, tragic result of the radical interrogation of possibility. As Derrida himself admits, it was the culture of inflated, all-enveloping narratives of possibility, Hegel, Marx, and their ilk, that led his generation to the work of decomposition. In Mann's terms, revenge against the self-righteous totalizing faiths of the masters, a work in which they were themselves ultimately consumed by the need to be saved from themselves. How do we then begin after the after without succumbing to the wish for a deus ex machina? Here I propose that the only all-enveloping narrative remaining being that of postmodernism, that rather than to submit to its own radical interrogation, we turn its project back upon itself. We radically interrogate its presumption of impossibility. Is it the case that there can be no narratives, authors, connections, gifts, progress, or selves? The postmodern animus is directed against the Western assumption that God, history, or nature mandated these, but its extreme rhetoric, very much the legacy of the totalizing ancestors it opposed, appeared to rule them out to core. But what if learning how to live and all of its achievements, story, authenticity, authority, mutual bonds, generosity, growth, and authenticity, are, though not written in stone and on display in the temple, rather developmental achievements possible for those serious about undertaking the quest for how to live? I will emphasize that word developmental strenuously. In this context, the radical interrogation of impossibility would ask, under what conditions and in what way or ways is absence a repression, a suppression of human potential, my potential, for reaching beyond the bare given? Two quick examples to make the point. Objectivity, that is God's perspective, we now know is as such impossible. Yet we also intuit that some uncoverings reveal and some accountings encompass more of their worlds than others. They enable us to experience more deeply and to inhabit a space more comprehendingly. We make such judgments about what we are given in terms of what Chris calls all the time. What I make these judgments is a complicated matter worthy of further inquiry. Lead may lie in John Stuart Mill's reflections on Tocqueville's democracy in America. How did Tocqueville, Mill asks, a latter-day French aristocrat, produce